Hi again. Hi, everyone. It is 6 p.m. in Turkey, and it should be 8 p.m. for you, Sarah, right? So
8 a.m.
Yeah, very early in the morning, and you have your morning coffee, your regular morning coffee with you, a large one. I'd like to thank you once again for accepting our invitation to join our Academic Integrity Policies PhD course here that we are running at Çanakkale 18 Mart University, Turkey. Our topic today is tips to develop and revise academic integrity policies. And as someone who is who has published quite widely on academic integrity policies and who has quite a lot of experience in this, I believe your contribution will add a lot to our discussion today. If you don't mind, I'd like to share my screen and I'd like to introduce you to our audience while providing some background by wrapping up so far what we have done in this course, so that we can relate our previous topics with today's topic. I believe you can see my presentation. Today, we are supposed to be dealing with academic integrity policies, how we can revise and develop academic integrity policies. But as so far we indicated, we highlighted that indeed a policy is a document. Indeed, we are referring to a paper. Our real aim with regards to developing policies is indeed instituting a culture of academic integrity. So indeed, we'd like to see how policies are contributing to the institution of academic integrity culture at the academia. Within this respect, of course, there are some theories in the relevant literature, and we will have a reference to holistic approach here, and we'll be relating the core elements of policies with regards to previous theories. And then I'm going to leave it to Sarah. She has quite a lot to talk to you about it. Now, let me start by introducing Dr. Sarah Elaine Eaton to you. Sarah is an associate professor working at the University of Calgary in Canada. She holds a PhD and she's working at Wharton School of Education. She is the inaugural educational leader in residence and academic integrity. And I'm proud to tell you that she is the editor-in-chief for the International Journal for Educational Integrity. So it's a real reference source for all of us dealing with academic integrity. She is the co-founder and co-editor of Canadian Perspectives on Academic Integrity. Considering her contribution to academia in Canada, she received an award for her contributions from the Canadian Society for the Study of Higher Education in 2020. So far, she has published widely relating to educational integrity and academic integrity, specifically in the Journal of Academic Ethics. By the way, Loretta is the editor of Journal of Academic Ethics, and she will be joining us next week. The British Journal of Educational Research, Interchange, and the Journal of Educational Thought, among other journals. Recently, if I'm not mistaken, she is giving more emphasis to publishing books, I mean edited collections. We recognize plagiarism in higher education, tackling tough topics in academia, which was published in 2021, or is it planned to be published, Sarah? And she is also working on a Springer Nature series on ethics and integrity in educational context. I'm sure Sarah will refer to some other publications, some other more recent publications in her presentation as well. Now, before I leave the word to Sarah, I'd like to briefly sum up what we have done so far so that we can relate our discussions. From the very beginning, we are trying to focus on the roles of different types of academic integrity policies. And when we check the development of the policies, we see that there is a change from punitive to educational approach, as highlighted by Tracy. We see that previous policies gave more attention to detection and reaction towards academic misconduct, but recently, by the help of proactive policies, now we aim to prevent academic misconduct from the very beginning by the help of pedagogical approaches. Here, especially, I'd like to call your attention to instituting a culture of academic integrity at our institutions. And here we recognize developing academic integrity policies, well-developed academic integrity policies, as a keystone in doing this. Indeed, although we regard policies as papers, indeed, they are providing some logical framework for us with reference to some causal links. And when we check the policies, we can understand the responsibilities of different stakeholders and how we can give academic integrity education to our stakeholders, and then how we can investigate suspected cases, how we can deliver violations of sanctions, and more importantly, we see the role of restorative justice in the policies, which is a very important element of proactive policies. Regarding this, establishing a culture of academic integrity will require benefiting from a holistic approach and also multi-stakeholder approach. It means that we need to encourage all stakeholders in our policies. Considering holistic approach, what do we see? We see that, for example, orientation programs are encouraged here so that we can provide support to people at every stage. And then we can increase awareness at the campus by using some visual materials. It means that with reference to such an approach, we can interact with our students. We can have some in-service training with academics or administrators. So it is important in terms of professional development. And then we can also have some trainings regarding how we can benefit from tools. Suppose, for example, almost at any institution globally, academics are benefiting from text matching software. However, before we benefit from text matching software, do we receive any in-service training from our institutions or from somewhere else? So this is the question. And with regards to holistic approach, we are expected to provide such support. Regarding the institution of culture, academic integrity culture, here I'll be referring to Stefan's three-level model of intervention. As we have already reminded previously, that's what Tracy said, we need to benefit from a holistic approach, inviting every stakeholder to take the responsibility. And here in this model, we can see the responsibilities of different stakeholders. For example, at the bottom, we see students, teachers, administrators, parents. So we see all stakeholders are included here, and we are referring to school-wide education. When it comes to one step further, this time we have only students and teachers. It means that we are having context-specific prevention. Or in this model, we could even refer to individual remediation, which means that we are simply merely focusing on students. And I believe this three-level model of intervention helps us for the institution of academic integrity culture. Considering this theory in our mind, I'd like to also remind you the importance of honor codes and the importance of familiarity of the stakeholders with these honor codes. And I'll be quoting from McCabe here. His introduction to the concepts around academic honesty and dishonesty came over 50 years ago when he received his admission package in the mail from Princeton University, including information about their honor code. So this is a quote from McCabe. And we learn from his first-hand experience, we learn the importance of honor codes. I mean, it could be a simple notice for you, for the lecturer, for the administrators, but in terms of changing the perceptions of students or increasing their awareness, this might mean a lot. Within this perspective, as Çanakkale 18 Mart University Center for Academic Integrity, this year, we try to familiarize our stakeholders by the help of seminars. You see a photo, a shot from one of the seminars. We indeed targeted 4 different group of people. This is a picture from the seminar for academics. We also address students and postgraduate students at another seminar session. And finally, we had an individual seminar session for international students, because from our experiences, we learned that these 4 different groups has different dynamics. So it is good to address them individually, considering their responsibilities and their possible contribution to the cultivation of academic integrity culture. Then, okay, we need policies. What to include in our policy? As we said previously, responsibilities of stakeholders is important. We need to identify this. We need to identify how we are going to educate integrity, and then how we are going to investigate suspected cases, how we will deliver violations, sanctions, and how we are going to address restorative justice, and how we will include pedagogy and assessment design. This came to be more important with regards to moving our education online by emergence remote teaching, and globally we suffered from reliable assessment designs, and finally training and other aspects. They should all be covered with our policies. When it comes to writing the policy, it doesn't seem to be an easy task for institutions. And when we check academic integrity policies, sometimes we can realize that there are some plagiarized, repeatedly used expressions in the policies. Indeed, we see some excerpts here which were provided last year by Sarah, and I believe she will talk about, she will touch this issue as well. In Canada last year, there were some concerns relating to plagiarism incidents in K-12 curriculums. So what does it mean? It means that institutions might be copying from each other. Therefore, we believe that it is important to get some assistance in writing our policies or in drafting our policies. For this purpose, my PhD student, Özgür Çelik, is running a PhD project on academic integrity policy at K-12 level. And he has collected policy samples globally and then created his own corpus. And by using this corpus, he developed a digital tool. By the help of this digital tool, it becomes easier for institutions to write their policies, of course, by safely citing them. If you'd like to try it, try this policy tool. Here is the username and password. The username is feedback, all in lower cases. The password is admin. Again, it is in lower cases. Now, I'd like to stop here and leave the floor to Sarah. Sarah, we are very pleased to see you here in this presentation, and I'd like to thank you in advance for your invaluable contribution. Now I'm going to assign you as the co-host so that you will be able to share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. It really is an honor to be with all of you today. For me, it's so exciting to talk about academic integrity policy, and especially to connect with students. As Dr. Razi said, you're the future of our profession. And it's just, you have opportunities to study these topics that I never had as a student that simply weren't available. So it's really a joy to be with you today. And I wonder if before we begin with the slides, if I could take a moment to get to know each of you a little bit. Dr. Razi, would that be okay if I ask the students to introduce themselves?
Yeah, sure. That's a great idea.
Super. Yeah, and I know that I think we have everybody here today, but if you're here in the Zoom meeting with us, I would love it if we could maybe go down the participant list in the order in which your names appear so that I can get introductions. And I know also we have one of my PhD students who has joined you today. Thank you, Dr. Razi, for permitting Beatrice to join us as an extra guest today. But I wonder if we could start with the Turkish students and then go to Beatrice, and then I'll get into the presentation. Would that be okay?
Sure, Demet, so it's your turn first, okay? You start.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome. So I am a PhD student and taking this course in this semester. And at the same time, I am an EFL instructor at a university. I've been teaching for approximately 9 years. And I'm very happy to be here and attend this course because every week, like you, valuable people come and so we attend this course. So at the same time, I gain a lot about academic integrity. So I feel myself lucky actually here. If you have any questions, I can answer.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Is it Eaton? Please correct my pronunciation if it's wrong.
No, that's true. Esin. My name is Esin. And I'm an instructor at Turkey University for about 14 years. Before that, I worked as a teacher at a high school, at a private high school. I'm a PhD student for a half term here in Çanakkale 18 Mart University. Before I take this course, actually, I just know about plagiarism. And when I hear the word academic integrity, I just know plagiarism. But in this course, I have learned a lot. And every week we have so available guests here like you. Beforehand, I would like to thank you for your enormous information that you will share with us. If you have any questions, I can answer as well.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to meet you. Next, Tunis.
Hi everyone, I am Güneş. I am Güneş Saygı, and I am working as assistant principal in a high school for 5 years. And normally I am English teacher. This course is really interesting for me, as you know, I am an assistant principal and I have to conduct some important rules in my institution. And by this course, I aware that we have very gaps, and I have to immediately conduct a policy in my institution. That's why I am lucky, and I am working in a big city in Turkey, in Adana. I think this will be a good perspective from all teacher working in this city, because I am planning a big study later on. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, is it Hava?
Yeah, it's me. Hi, everybody. I totally agree with my friends. It is a really useful course for us. We've learned a lot. And I think it's a great chance because before that course, I wasn't so aware of how to prepare a text or how to write an article or something like that. And thanks to Salim Hocam and the other guests all through this term, we've learned a lot, and I think I can do better now. And I'm a lecturer at a university in Turkey, in Malatya. And I think this will be a good way for us to improve us in this term. Thank you all.
Thank you. Next, is it Kubra?
Yes, I am. My name is Kibra. I am an EFL instructor at a foundation university in Istanbul for about 5 years. I think, like my friends, before taking this course, I just knew about plagiarism. But after taking this course, thanks to you and the other honorary guest and Salim Hocam, I have learned lots of things about academic integrity, like misconduct, plagiarism, and other kinds of things. So I feel very contented about it. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Meltem?
Hello, I'm Meltem, and yes, like all of my friends, we are so lucky to have a course like this, because we all became enlightened about the terms, policies, important aspects of academic integrity, because as all the others mentioned, we were just aware of plagiarism. That was our focus when we say academic integrity. But now we are talking about policies, promoting it, having a holistic approach, and the stakeholders. I have never thought about stakeholders before. I was just thinking about students and their misconduct, but we have a lot to do and a lot to learn still, I guess. And thank you for joining us today.
Wonderful, thank you. And Sultan?
Hello, and I am Sultan Tutku from Fethiye Muğla, and I have been an EFL instructor for more than 10 years at a state university. And so far, till the beginning of this course, I thought that academic integrity is all about plagiarism, and I didn't know much about the other things. And I have learned a lot thanks to Salim Hocam, Dr. Razı, and you and other distinguished guests. And I feel quite privileged and honored to be with you and learning from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your introductions. Have we covered all of the students from Turkey? Have we missed anyone? No? Okay. Beatrice, your turn then.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for letting me be here today. It's nice to meet you all. Thank you to Dr. Razi, who allowed me to be here at this moment. So I am a second-year PhD student at the World Luna School of Education here in Calgary. I am a Chilean international student in Canada currently. My supervisor is Dr. Elaine Eaton. So my research interests at this moment are in the intersections of the scholarship of teaching and learning and academic integrity, but I have been involved in a study of policy analysis in Chilean higher education institutions. So I thought this was an amazing opportunity for me to be here and learn. So again, thank you, and it's nice to meet you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for your introductions. It's great for me to come in as an honorary guest and to get to meet you as the students and to learn a little bit about your background, your professional expertise, and your interests. And with that, we'll get started with the topic for today's presentation. So I will just bring up my slides. Please stand by one moment. There we go. You should be able to see my slides. Can you see them? Terrific. And so today I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey to Canada virtually, where we're undertaking a project on academic integrity policy, looking at policy development and revision. So this is through a Canadian lens today. As is typical in Canadian higher education and beyond, I begin my presentation today with an acknowledgement that I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region, the Indigenous peoples of Canada, who signed the Treaty 7 region a long time ago in southern Alberta. These include the Indigenous tribes from the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika Nation, the Piikani Nation, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nation. And I would also like to acknowledge that the city of Calgary, where I'm joining you from today, is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We have been on a journey in Canada for some time now regarding decolonization and indigenization and truth and reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples of Canada, acknowledging and repairing harms that were caused when Europeans, principally the English and French, but also others, came to Canada and inflicted some injustices and abuses on the Indigenous peoples. People in my country now have been on a path to reconcile with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And so we begin often by acknowledging that I come from a European background. My parents were both from Britain. Well, my father's Canadian, but his ancestry is from Britain. My mother was directly from England. And to recognize that we come to this land, and before us, the Indigenous peoples inhabited this land for thousands of years before Europeans colonized this land. And this has become part of our ethical practice in Canada. And so even though it seems like it might not be related to academic integrity directly, it's important to acknowledge the ways, I think, in which academic integrity is an aspect of applied ethics in teaching, learning, and leadership in higher education, and to lead by example when it comes to that ethical practice. And so acknowledging the traditional Indigenous territories upon which I live now is part of that ethical situating of my work. Dr. Razi already gave me a wonderful introduction. Thank you for that. So I won't spend any more time on introduction of myself, but I wanted to give you a brief introduction to my country. In case you're unfamiliar with it, and even if you know some things about Canada, you might not be familiar with the way education works here. So I'll give you a little bit of background to set the stage for the talk today. Canada is divided into provinces and territories. So we have 10 provinces and 3 territories. And education, we have no federal system of education. When our country was founded as a country about more than 125 years ago, then certain responsibilities were delegated to the federal government and certain responsibilities were delegated to the provincial government. At the time, we didn't have territories. And 2 key aspects of governance were delegated to the provinces and territories. The one was education and the other was healthcare. Whereas things such as military and defense and federal budgets were maintained by the federal government. This is quite different from other countries where, for example, there's a federal system of education, and then that leads to a federal system of quality assurance. We don't have that. It's more decentralized and a little bit disconnected, and it requires the provinces to work together and the territories to work together for collaboration and communication, particularly with education. So even though we have more than 100 publicly funded universities and 135 more than that publicly funded colleges, there's no federal system for managing the quality assurance of our educational system. This means that academic integrity policy and other kinds of education policy at a very high level are determined at the provincial or territorial level. There are no consistent definitions of academic misconduct, including plagiarism, etc., across Canada. So in 2017, I published an analysis of 20 Canadian universities looking at definitions of plagiarism in academic integrity policies and found there was no consistent definition of what we mean when we talk about plagiarism. So a couple of things were common. Copying and pasting text from a particular source was common across the policies, but things that were not consistent included things such as computer code. Was copying computer code considered plagiarism? Was copying musical composition considered plagiarism? How about other kinds of creative works? So this led me down a path of deeper policy exploration, because I think there's an assumption that when we talk about things such as plagiarism, that we understand and we all are talking the same language when we use the same word. But I found, for example, that that was not the case here. This presents some problems because in terms of student and faculty mobility across institutions, if someone becomes accustomed to a particular definition of, say, plagiarism, and then they move to another university, or they move from being a student in one university to a faculty member in another university, they may not actually be dealing with the exact same definitions. So this was in 2017. So this research now seems a little dated, but we're still at the place in Canada where we do not yet have common definitions. The next year, I was able to, with a graduate student at the time, look at the research that had been conducted in my country regarding academic integrity, and we found that there was very little. There had been, I think, over a 25-year period, maybe just 56 articles that have been published on this topic from my country, leaving us behind other English-speaking countries at the time, such as the United States, Australia, etc. We also found that even graduate students who studied academic integrity did not go on to create their own programs of research around it, that they might have published a thesis and never published anything again. This was quite troubling for us at the time, because it meant that the research around this was not sustained or sustainable. We also found at the time a lack of collaborative research. So in other words, people who were doing academic integrity research were doing it on a small scale. There was almost nothing happening at the national level, and there was very little collaboration with researchers across the country. So after we published this literature, it was a literature review, but it was also for us a call to action, and provided us with some really important evidence to show how we could grow in my country with regards to academic integrity research. That article is now just about, it's 4 years old, and in 4 years, we've come a long way. So after publishing that piece of research, I started to think, how can I work with others in my country to do research at a national level, but also to build capacity and experience with people working together across our provincial and territorial borders and collaborate in ways they had never done before. And what I did was I developed and designed a policy analysis project to look at academic integrity policies, and specifically at contract cheating, because we had very little, no research at the time on contract cheating. So I can just put here for you in the chat, I've put it on the screen. The project, you can find more details about the project. We've posted it on the Open Science Framework, which, as you know, probably know, is a sort of a free website for researchers and scholars to build their own research project website. So we didn't have any funding for our project. We didn't have any funding for our webpage, for example. So we posted all of our project on the Open Science Framework, including the lists of the universities where we analyze the policies. We have our list of publications, everything in this is publicly available. You can certainly have a look at it. And through this project, one of the things that I wanted to do was to start looking at, just to share the project objectives with you. We wanted to look at, what does academic integrity policy in our country say, specifically with regards to contract cheating? Was it even mentioned? We sort of hypothesized that we didn't think it was mentioned, but we wanted to know. we wanted to know what were the gaps in our policies and procedures related to academic integrity, specifically contract cheating. And we also wanted to evaluate the policies against existing standards for post-secondary education. And we wanted to look at what had already been published. So specifically, we relied on the work of Tracy Bertag and the policy work she'd done in Australia. And at the beginning of this project, I had the privilege of having a Zoom call with Tracy about our project and asked her, how could we replicate the study she had done in Australia there with, I think it was 20 some universities in Australia. How could we replicate that study for the Canadian context? And she provided me with a lot of mentorship around the project design and how to do it. And she was also the editor of the journal where we had published that article with a grad student about the literature review and call to action for research in Canada. So she had read that. And so she had these sort of two things in her mind around doing this national policy study that came out of this literature review. And she had also lived in Canada for 1 year when she was 18 years old. So she had some familiarity with my country. She made some suggestions to me, such as, looking at supports that are available for undergraduate and graduate students. And then she also said, that it was important not only to do the research, but also to develop recommendations based on our findings. So that was very helpful for me. And one other thing that she talked to me about was she said she felt that there were too many universities in Canada to do one project. And she recommended to me that I divide the project by region and then examine each region specifically. And then at the end, then bring them all together. And she said when they did the Australian project, they had a team. They had funding, and they were able to there were far fewer universities and colleges, so they were able to complete their project. So she encouraged me to sort of chunk out the project into smaller pieces and do it that way. So that is exactly what we did. We followed her advice. So we had as our research question for our project, how do post-secondary institutions in Canada address contract cheating in their academic integrity policy related documents? And we had various sub-projects that I'll talk about in a minute, but I'll just take a little pause and say when we talk about post-secondary institutions, for us in Canada, that would include universities and colleges. We have different kinds of colleges, including polytechnics. Some polytechnics are universities, some polytechnics are considered colleges, and other 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges. If you're familiar with the literature from the United States, you might have heard the term community college. That term also used to be used in Canada, and now we just typically say colleges, so for non-academic programs. And then most of our universities and colleges are publicly funded. We do have some private universities in Canada, certainly not as many as in the United States. And there's not as much difference in terms of the quality or quality assurance. We have a very even quality of our higher education programs. So unlike in the United States, for example, where names like the Ivy League schools, Princeton, Harvard, Yale are very well known and they're seen as being the top schools, we have this very even set. So even though people might know the University of Toronto, it's the oldest university, and yes, there are some rankings, the actual difference between them is quite a bit smaller than, for example, our counterparts in the United States. One of the other things we found through this research have been some of the differences between Canada and the US. I'll take a little pause here before I talk about this project in a little bit more detail. I was fascinated by Dr. Razi's comment at the beginning about honor codes. And this is very prominent in American discourse on academic integrity. And as we've been delving into this more research around Canada, we now have a very strong research program. I believe if you haven't already met my colleague, Dr. Martine Peters, then you'll be meeting her soon. She's also leading a strong research project in Canada around plagiarism. We're developing our research and scholarship and community in Canada in the past 5 years in ways we haven't done before. But with regards to honor codes, one of the things that I've been writing about in the past couple of years is why honor codes might not be useful in my country. or they might not be applicable because the university systems and higher education systems of the two countries, Canada and the United States, developed very differently over time. And the honor code system is very much embedded in American ways of thinking and sort of American sensibilities in higher education, and also developed at prestigious universities in the United States that were designed for educating upper class gentlemen at the time, and that largely the people who attended universities in those days at that time, they were men. Women were not permitted, of course, at the time, and they were only for white people, and they were only for people of European descent. So in my country, when I started the talk today, I talked about the journey we've been on to look at decolonization and indigenization. And as I look at this, I think we'd need to do a little bit more investigation when it comes to honor codes, but I think that there's a reason to pause and ask if honor codes are based in colonialism and based in ways of educating that might be outdated. There might be some valuable things to carry forward, but I think we need a deeper examination of honor codes and to be able to ask ourselves if and how they might apply and what's the best things that we could bring forward rather than simply replicating systems that exist in other countries. I think this is important for you in Turkey as you're doing your research there, because you're getting these global perspectives in your course in a way that students, as far as I know, other students nowhere in the world have the same opportunities you have to study academic integrity. And as you're doing your work and reading and understanding these perspectives from different parts of the world, I encourage you to ask yourselves what things make sense for you in Turkey and what things don't. It's probable, my guess is there will be things that you can extract the best of or the most applicable pieces to your relevant context in Turkey, but all of it might not apply. So don't be afraid to ask yourselves what will work for you in your Turkish context and what doesn't. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. So as we were building this project, I did take Tracy Bertag's advice about replicating her study from Australia, but also looking at it through a Canadian lens and also adding on a new layer that Bertag et al. Did not look at when they conducted their study that was published in 2011, that we wanted to focus on contract cheating. So we subdivided our project according to our Canadian regions. Ontario is our biggest province. So if you've heard of the city of Toronto or our capital city of Ottawa, they're situated within the province of Ontario. It is our largest English-speaking province. So we wanted to start there. And we had different teams working on each provincial or regional project, because one of the goals of the project was also to give people experience who had not previously had the chance to work together collaboratively or to work on academic integrity research as part of a team. So first we looked at colleges in Ontario. We had a small team to do that. And then we looked at Ontario universities. So in terms of the completion of the project, that province is complete. Then we moved to Western Canada, and I worked with one colleague there, Dr. Brenda Stace, and we looked at all of the universities in Western Canada. Even though there's four provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia, we have fewer universities than Ontario, for example. Once we completed that, then we started to look at Western Canadian colleges, and I'm working with a couple of colleagues now to look at those colleges. And then we moved east to the Atlantic provinces of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland. And I've worked with the team and worked with researchers from that region to look at the academic integrity policies of their region. We have finished our analysis for that, and we're just in the process right now. We actually have our first presentation on that this week. And we'll be writing up the results. And then that leaves us with the colleges from Atlantic Canada and then the Northern Territories of Canada, which actually have very few. There's only one university in the Northern Territories. So those are the ones up in the Arctic or near the Arctic. And so then it will be finished. So we've had, it's been a long project. It will be a 5-year project by the time we're done, but it was not funded. So we've been working with volunteer researchers across the country to do this. We'll be using some common frameworks. We have been using some common frameworks, namely Bretag's 5 core elements of academic integrity policy. You will no doubt know these from having read her work, looking at access and approach, responsibility, detail, and support. So we use this framework to analyze these policies from our own universities and colleges in our country. We wanted to use an existing framework so that we were building on something that was already done and had been vetted through peer-reviewed publication, and not, as we say, reinvent the wheel. We felt that the policy framework that had been developed by Tracy Bretag and her colleagues was very high quality and would also give us a point of departure for our own analysis. So we began by collecting the policies and procedures documents. At most of our institutions in Canada, because they're publicly funded, the policies for those institutions are available to the public. There was, I think, 2 cases of the universities where we couldn't get them, so we wrote to them and they were able to provide them to us. So basically, all schools, post-secondary schools, have these documents already. They are developed, they exist, and they were easy to find. And then we set up spreadsheets with criteria to extract data, including the audience. So who were the policies written for? Were they written for the students? Were they written for the staff? Were they written for everybody at the university? We looked at the titles. We wanted to know, was there a focus on academic integrity or a focus on the negative and more deficit-based approaches of academic misconduct or academic dishonesty? We wanted to look at the language in them. And so we had 2 team members code and extract the data. In this way, it was sort of like a systematic review, and that we did have 2 people for each one. And we then we engaged in a process of inter-rater consensus or inter-rater reliability. And we did that through collaborative dialogue. And then we used Tracy Bretag et al.'s conceptual framing of those 5 core elements. So the collection of documents, we named each document, so we knew that we were all working with the same ones. We set up our spreadsheets. Dr. Razi, if you're ever interested, or any of the students, you're ever interested in having the copy of the data instruments that we developed, I'd be happy to share those with you, because we've now used them for our different phases, and we've looked at 80 different institutions across my country, including 22 colleges and 58 publicly funded universities. So this will be a little bit updated from the last time I was sharing with this group, because I think we'd only looked at 60 some at that time. So we now have 80. So we have a really good, strong understanding of academic integrity policies in our country, what exists and what can be done better. So in the next couple of slides, I'll share with you some of our results that we had from our project, and then move into sort of the tips for policy revision. You can see here that we were going across the country pretty systematically with our provinces. We haven't looked again at those northern territories yet, but we've basically been able to go from the east to the west and examine post-secondary institutions across our entire country. In terms of our results, this is the snapshot for you. You'll notice, first of all, that I looked at those 5 core elements from Tracy Bretag, and then we analyzed our documents through that lens. In terms of access, we found that most of our policies in Canada were accessible with between 2 and 4 mouse clicks from an institution's web homepage. This meant that students can access the academic integrity policies, professors can access them, so can administrators, so can parents and members of the public, usually by typing into the university search page, academic integrity policy or academic misconduct policy. And that typically you don't have to go through layers and layers and layers of websites, that they're pretty easy to get to within a couple of clicks. We felt that this made, in general, our policies more accessible and transparent. When we looked at the approach, we found that most of them were judicial in nature, meaning that they mirrored legal documents and court type documents. We found that many of them focused on procedural fairness, which is a concept of natural justice. And certainly in North American, the Canadian justice system is built on the British justice system. And we found often that there was legalistic language in them. So in other words, the policies, we could tell, had often been written by lawyers. And some of it was evident to us that they were designed in order to ensure that there was clarity, but also that cases were not escalated. So for example, that a parent couldn't come to the university and say, you must drop this case of academic misconduct against my child, that they were written in such a way as to prevent that. But in doing so, there was inconsistency with our policies with regards to educational approaches and academic integrity values. So what I mean by this is often the lawyers in our experience who are involved in writing these policies, they don't care about students' education. They're lawyers and they're paid to be lawyers. And so their job is to write legalistic type documents. So we noticed a real tension in these policy documents, whereas people like me and other educators might want to focus on student advocacy, student learning, helping to build students' understanding of what's expected. And the lawyers simply want to address misconduct through almost like it's administrative law. This is one branch of law that we have, but in some cases the language almost mirrored criminal justice with words such as guilt being used, whereas in other policies we would find the words, for example, responsible rather than guilty. Students were held responsible for their behavior rather than being found guilty. And so many of you talked about being English language teachers, so you'll understand the nuances and importance of language and how different it can be in finding someone guilty as opposed to holding them responsible. And so in terms of responsibility, this third element here that we looked at through Tracy Bretaig's framework, we found that the documents did focus on holding students responsible for and avoiding academic misconduct. So we found things in the policies that said things such as, it is the student's responsibility to understand the policies. It is the student's responsibility to follow the rules. But in most of the documents, there was no indication of how. How were students to find these policies? How were students to find out what was expected of them? And Canada is a very multicultural country, and we have students not only who were born in Canada, but in many universities, 25 to 30% of our students come from overseas. So when we get students from all over the world, this becomes a really important question. How do we expect students to know, for example, what do we mean when we talk about plagiarism? My previous research had shown that we ourselves in Canada don't have consistent definitions of plagiarism. So how can we possibly expect our students to understand what we mean when we talk about plagiarism or exam cheating or collusion or other forms of academic misconduct? This is a big deficiency in our policies that we have. So we actually found a deficit-based focus. So we didn't find positive language in them. We didn't find supportive language for our students. And there was also very little focus on any faculty responsibilities. We didn't actually find in our policies, by and large, that faculty hold any responsibility really for teaching students about what we mean when we talk about academic integrity. What is the professor's responsibility for teaching students to avoid plagiarism or to teach students what is expected of them? Faculty responsibilities were articulated only in terms of reporting misconduct after it had happened, not for preventing it. Again, this presents an opportunity for us to grow here and to further develop through policy, teaching, and learning. With regards to contract cheating specifically, we found very little in the way of details about contract cheating in our policies. Very few policies actually named contract cheating. And as I've said, when I've given public presentations or invited presentations in my own country, we cannot solve a problem that we do not name. So we found indirect language, vague language, such as unauthorized collaboration, third-party assistance. And when I look at words like that, and I think, if I were an undergraduate student, how would I understand this? What would this mean to me? Oh, hi, Georgie. This is Georgie. Georgie likes to talk about academic integrity. And so we found that there were opportunities in our policies across our country to actually name contract cheating for what it is and explain it to students through the policies. And then with regards to the support for students, we found very little consistency across our institutional policies for providing or suggesting additional learning supports for students. Again, this is an opportunity for us to do better by our students by providing academic integrity tutorials, or education during student orientation. Most of our universities have some kind of student orientation. Of course, it's changed during COVID-19, and to provide ongoing support to students through, say, a student experience center, etc. And so some of our key takeaways for this were that the policies were typically written by lawyers. They typically did not have an educational approach. They put a lot of emphasis on students' responsibility, but not much on faculty responsibility or administrator responsibility, except for reporting misconduct. We found that the language used was often vague, legalistic, deficit-based, difficult to understand, and really inaccessible for somebody who wasn't a lawyer, and also very inaccessible for individuals for whom English was an additional language, as is the case with many of our students and also many of our faculty members. So it was difficult language to understand. And in addition, the policies that existed talked about punishments for students after misconduct had occurred, but did not provide sufficient supports for students to learn about academic integrity. So in terms of what we learned, when we compared our existing policies in Canada to what existed in Australia, we found that very few could be considered exemplary. As exemplary is defined was by Tracy Bertag and her colleagues almost 10 years prior to when we started our study. So we knew that we had in the world existing frameworks for developing these exemplary policies, and no one in my country had been paying attention. We found that at the time that information about contract cheating was generally limited. And I'm happy to tell you now that in the time since we started our project in 2018, even in these 4 years, it's grown a lot. And we're doing much better with that now through events such as the International Day of Action Against Contract Cheating. And many universities in Canada now mark the Academic Integrity Week. We've actually been in touch with our partners from the European Network on Academic Integrity and collaborators to align our Academic Integrity Week in Canada with the one that you have through INAI and other countries. And I think now that Academic Integrity Week will soon be a global initiative, if it's not already, that will be based around the International Day of Action around contract cheating. And INAI has been such a valuable partner to us in Canada because we look to our partners there to understand what are you doing there, and particularly with regards to collaboration. The partners in INAI collaborate in ways that until recently Canadians had not done. We also found that most of our policies would benefit from revision, from providing additional learning supports to our students, such as tutorials to learn about academic integrity, and teaching and learning supports for our faculty so that they understand the importance of talking about academic integrity to their students to promote academic integrity, prevent misconduct, and not simply to report it after it had happened, and that there were opportunities for improved student resources. We also found the absence of language as important as what was included. So we didn't use the word contract cheating. And we had unclear definitions of things like plagiarism. We know that this can create confusion for students and faculty and administrators. So these were some key points that we drew out of our study. And in terms of revising policy, because I know our topic today is about tips and tricks, with regards to revising policy, in order for us to bring forward recommendations about how we can do it better, we can now say this is grounded in evidence. We can now say we've conducted a scientific analysis of the policies from more than 80 institutions across our country. We don't have to rely on research from other countries, although that can be used to help us inform and understand what we know. We have evidence from our own country now. And as you're doing this work around policy revision, one of the key things I would encourage you to think about is the ways in which your recommendations can be based in evidence, because then it has more impact and weight, I think, with administrators say, oh, I think we should do this, or I think we should do that. People will have opinions about academic misconduct. But when we have research findings to support our recommendations, that changes the conversation quite a bit. Our project has been conducted in English only, which has been a limitation of the project so far, because we're a bilingual country where English and French are the official languages. So far, we haven't had folks on our policy team that have been speaking in French. So you'll know my colleague, Dr. Martine Peters, and the work she's doing on plagiarism. She's a native speaker of French, but her focus is on plagiarism rather than on policies. And so one of the things I'd like to do with this project going forward is to look at the policies from universities in our French-speaking province of Quebec and see how are they different and how can we learn from one another. And we did only look at publicly funded institutions because these are the majority of our schools. I think you would call these state schools or state-funded schools. Although we have private schools, there's not very many. And the ones that we have are either for profit or they're religious based. So often Christian universities. And the private schools often don't have to make their policies publicly known. It's a requirement for the state-funded schools. And we did only look at publicly available documents. So in some cases, there might have been internal memos or internal reports. And if we couldn't find them that way, then we looked at what we could only get through the website. And because the project has received no funding and the various members of our research teams have been volunteering their time for the past 4 years to undertake this work, the project has moved slowly. And so this is one of the limitations of research that is not funded. But in terms of our recommendations, we have recommendations now. We know that in Canada, we have an opportunity to address contract cheating more explicitly through our policies and also for our education for students. And that one of the things I've been advocating through this work is that we name contract cheating as a problem to be addressed. And the policies, in some cases, the administrators reviewing them are thinking about academic misconduct from the time when we were students, going to university, for example, in the 1980s or even the 1990s. And we should know that you students today live in a very different world than we did when we went to university. So I graduated from my doctorate, my PhD in 2009. And even at that time, contract cheating was not on anybody's radar. So if we only write our policies in thinking about when we were students, we're not doing right by our students today. We need to do better, I think, for students of today, because you live in a different world. Contract cheating is everywhere. And so we need to address this in our policies. We also, I think, need to increase support for our students so they can understand what is expected of them and what the consequences are. In the work that I do here, one of the things that breaks my heart, moving from scholar to educator, breaks my heart is when I see international students be found responsible of plagiarism or academic misconduct, and they say they didn't know because the rules in their country were so different. Or the expectations were so different. And it's like they come here and nobody tells them what the rules are. And so they don't actually know when they've broken them. So and often international students here, as in the United States, as in Australia, as in the UK, will pay much higher tuition than domestic students. So I think if we're going to welcome international students to our universities, it is our responsibility as educators and administrators here to let them know what's expected of them in a variety of ways, and one of them being academic integrity. So we need to have clear definitions in our policies and to prevent, I have here idiosyncratic interpretation across an institution. So if an institution hasn't defined plagiarism, then one professor might interpret it one way and a different professor might interpret it a different way. And this is something that I think it can be fixed and should be fixed with policy. It should be clear and that it's easy to understand what the definitions are. And in my country, we absolutely need provincial and national frameworks for academic integrity. We don't have these. And recently, in the past year or so, I've been looking to other English-speaking countries, in particular Ireland, where they've now developed a national lexicon for academic integrity. This is similar to the ANI glossary. But when I look at this from a national framework, I ask myself, how could we do something like this in Canada? I don't have an answer yet, but it's one of the questions that I'd like to continue to explore, is having national lexicon and frameworks for this. We have a lot of work to do here. We've come a long way and we still have more work to do. And we also need to ensure that academic integrity is part of our quality assurance conversations in my country. In other countries, it's absolutely part of quality assurance in the UK, in Australia, in Ireland. And yet here, our quality assurance bodies have yet to pay attention to academic integrity in ways that is happening in other countries. So to conclude, and then we'll have lots of time for questions, I think, we are better able to understand academic integrity through a policy lens in ways that we've never done before. And we were able to do this by using existing frameworks, the one from Tracy Bertag. We know that our recommendations for policy reform are evidence-based. They're not based in opinions or beliefs. We can show what we've learned through our scientific findings of our project. Another amazing thing for us was now we have bigger research projects happening across Canada. We have Canadians who are leading national and international projects. When we started this project, that wasn't happening. So over the last 4 years, we've come a long way, and this project has presented opportunities for researchers from different institutions to collaborate, build capacity, publish articles, and we've presented this work at international conferences now, scientific conferences, academic integrity conferences. We've published in peer-reviewed journals, and through this, we are building a network and a community of academic researchers through this project, which I think is pretty exciting, given that even just 4 years ago, when we did our literature review, there was very little collaboration happening across our country. And we know that when I talk about knowledge mobilization, this is a term we use in Canada, and specifically when it talks about what we would previously have called dissemination of research findings or research results. Knowledge mobilization is a new term we're using here, but it basically means sharing the findings through conference presentations and peer-reviewed journal articles, which we've done. We felt that that was a really important part of the project in order to give the project legitimacy. So that's my last slide to share with you about our project and a little bit about academic integrity policy in Canada and how we've come to this work and where we're going next. We'll finish the Atlantic Canadian University policy, Western Canada colleges, and then move north into our Northern Territories there. So we still have some work to do. It's my goal for this project to be completed by 2023. So that then we can be able to start on the next piece, which for me would be, looking at national policy frameworks. But we're not there yet. We have to do the foundational piece first. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides now. I've given a copy of my slides as a PDF to Dr. Razi that he has my permission to share with you. But I'm going to stop talking for a minute and give you an opportunity to ask any questions, leave any comments. I'm interested to know from you what, if anything, for you was new here, what surprised you, and what questions do you have?
May I? Actually, I have read your study. I have read about your study beforehand, and I shared it with some of my friends here. And I thought that it was such a great idea to do it and in the countrywide. And I thought that, why don't we do it here in Turkey? And I shared it with Dr. Razi. And I asked some of my friends to investigate, like in brief, what's going on in their universities, kind of like piloting the idea. But it's such a big project to carry out, I guess. And I'm quite novice and quite new to the field. And I'm really
so much interested in the topic. And also, I'm planning to work with Dr. Razi, and I'm planning to do my thesis on academic integrity. So here is a very decent, sincere question coming from myself. Where shall I start if I would like to carry out such a project?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. Thank you for asking that question. And I can say, we have developed analysis tools through this project. So we have tools we use them as Excel spreadsheets. They can help you with the analysis. They can help you with the systematic collection of the documents. So where to start? Well, I can tell you in terms of our method, one of the places we started with was making our lists. That was actually the first step of which institutions to include and which institutions not to include. And in working with Beatrice has now applied our framework to Chile. And she has pretty much as an individual student conducted this analysis of Chile with my support. Looking at her own country's policies. I think there's been 20, how many universities are you looking at, Beatrice?
About 53.
Okay, 53. Wow, it's an awful lot. But I think, we started with the first question of which institutions to include and why. And we developed the rationale, because there will always be some that you won't include and you need to understand why you're excluding them. And there might be some that you're not sure if they should be included or not. And so having someone to dialogue. So if you were to ask with Dr. Razi, which would you include and which not and why, getting your list to start with of which universities and then collecting the documents. And it might be easy to find your documents and it might be difficult. Collecting the documents was fairly time consuming. I think, and Beatrice has been doing this now parallel project for Chile. It can take weeks or months to even just collect the documents, but then put them all in a folder so you have them. And then one thing we found very helpful was to develop folders for each university. And so to have policy documents for each university in each folder so that we knew how many documents for each university we were looking at. I mean, when I talked about doing these 80 universities or 80 institutions, we would have, we've looked at now hundreds of documents because universities sometimes might have policies in one document and procedures in another document. They might have guidelines, they might have processes, they might have flowcharts. We collected all of it. And then to develop your systematic method for analysis and how you go through that. So I think you can divide a project like this into pretty easy steps that starts with identification of the universities, collection of the documents, coming up with your data analysis criteria, and then going through the data analysis procedure. But I would also give yourself a lot of time because it will take you more time than you anticipate to do this work. Is that helpful?
Yes, it was so helpful to me. And as we are studying in the field of ELT, English language teaching, I think when we do the same thing for the universities giving English for academic purposes lessons and their policies, it will be a good level of grading, making it some positive limitations to the study so that we can focus on one perspective of it.
Yeah, and in addition to Tracy Berteg's work, which was so helpful, I also started looking at policy because I'm situated as a professor in education faculty. I wanted to look at policy through the educational lens, right? And the policies were also applying to higher education. And there's a book that was actually very helpful to us in our study. It's an old book now, but it was still very useful. It was written by a woman named Jenny Osga from the UK. And this, it's now 22 years old, but she talks about policy research in educational settings. And I could not find a digital copy of this book. I had to order a hard copy from Amazon. But one of the things I really liked about Jenny Osga's approach to policy was that she talks about policy analysis as advocacy, analysis as advocacy, meaning that why are we doing this work? This is not merely an intellectual exercise. We're doing this to advocate for our students and to make life better for our students. And for so many of us that work in educational research, the underpinnings of social justice that drive us to do our work, we want things to be better for the next generation of students after us. And we want things to be better in general in our societies. And this for me was very instructive and helpful because it really helped me to understand why I'm doing this work. And it's really to advocate for better conditions for our students in which they can learn and also better conditions in which faculty can teach. So having the social justice philosophy underpin this for me was really helpful.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Tutku, for the question. Sorry for the interruption, but I'd like to question Tutku. Tutku, are you familiar with academic integrity policy of your institution?
We don't have any.
Okay.
We don't have an explicit one.
Okay, so I am specifically asking this question. Indeed, I'd like to direct this question to other students here as well. What about you? Are you familiar with academic integrity policies of your institutions?
The same case here, Hocam. In our context, we don't have an institutional policy, but some faculties have their own just websites and guidelines, not policies, but a bunch of words and sentences, actually.
Could you please give some examples from these guidelines?
Yeah, because I can't remember word to word, but it has
the general meaning of the guidelines.
Yeah, it's all about the importance of not to plagiarize or copy or contract it because it won't be accepted ethically. That's all. But there's nothing about the.
Does this include contract cheating as well? Do they provide any guidance on contract cheating?
Not guidance, just some words. Avoid them. This is all about it.
Yeah, it's like a warning for them.
Yeah, just a warning.
Yeah, you can see on the website of the faculty that's like this, and it's
Avoid
like a warning for them. And when I look at the website of our faculty, I see that there are some sentences, a couple of sentences in the mission and vision.
Vision, yes,
section,
absolutely.
And they just advocate originality of work and what else, like decent interest and motivation. So not explicitly.
Okay, so let me clarify how I read this situation, if you don't mind, Sarah. So here you provided a brief introduction regarding the policies in Canada, and when we check the issue from our perspective here, you already referred to quality agencies and the role of quality agencies and quality assurance in its relation to academic integrity. There seems to be an increasing interest in quality assurance here because once you get the certification from quality agencies, it means that you can get more funding from Turkish Higher Education Council. So universities recently have more interest in getting this certification. And to impress the reviewers, probably they are including some statements in their mission, make them visible on their web pages, even if there are no related policies, or even if there are no actions that might be supporting them. So first of all, we need to understand that, okay, Council of Higher Education in Turkey, they are providing a framework, a national framework relating to academic integrity policies. It's not a very detailed one, but they are providing some types of academic misconduct, and After COVID, when we moved to emergency remote teaching, they also called attention to academic integrity policy statements in the examinations. Now, we have a regulation, for example, coming from Council of Higher Education, asking students or informing students before the examinations, digital examinations, I mean, distant examinations, that they'll be obeying the principles of academic integrity. So this seems to be the only precaution that we have in terms of establishing reliability to the examinations when we are running them remotely. So it doesn't make sense to me. Of course, when we talk about academic integrity policies, we need to identify the role of every stakeholder. However, we seem to be giving all responsibility to students only by asking them to confirm that they will be acting in an acceptable manner. So there seems to be a mismatch between the statement and our practices here. So first of all, at the initial step, I believe that higher education institutions in Turkey should develop their own academic integrity policies. Before the investigation of academic integrity policies, this is an essential component. Maybe the board, I mean, Council of Higher Education, they can work on their framework, and they can extend the framework by giving more detailed explanations, so that they can provide more support to the institutions in the constitution, in the development of the policies. However, for now, making a policy analysis study in higher education institutions in Turkey does not make sense to me. But
no, I thank you for sharing this, right? I mean, you've actually touched on a very important assumption. And all research has assumptions. And the assumption that I'm making when I answered your question was the availability of data. And so in this case, when we're doing policy analysis, the policies themselves become the data, right? So when we think about academic integrity, research or any research, you've got your primary data that you might collect from humans. And then some people would say this is secondary data, looking at documents, document analysis. I know that some folks have done policy analysis through discourse analysis. There's different approaches to it, but that assumes the availability of the data. So we went through hundreds of documents, tens of thousands of pages, and this was our data. But if you don't have the data, then it could be that you come at it from a different point of view, starting, for example, by maybe looking at other countries and advocating for at least the introduction of policies in your countries.
Thank you. There will be very few universities in Turkey who are really aware of what academic integrity is. Many others will definitely relate academic integrity with plagiarism. So their understanding of academic integrity will be limited to plagiarism. So that's the issue. However, interestingly, we have recognized several K-12 institutions. These are mainly private schools who develop their academic integrity policies. Although many of these policies are not well developed, it seems to be more interest from K-12 level in terms of developing academic integrity policies. Hopefully, we will be providing some guidance on the development of academic integrity policies for higher education institutions. So once our students feel themselves more motivated, and when they have the power, probably after their graduation, once they hold their degrees, so they will have the power, and they will be able to develop academic integrity policies, I believe, for their institutions.
And something that is interesting here, I think, and worthwhile discussing in international context, is the ways in which professional accreditation bodies have begun to demand that academic integrity be included in educational programs in order for professionals to receive their professional license. So one example that we have, for example, is with engineers. In Canada, there is a national body that gives engineers a professional designation. So it's not enough for somebody to simply graduate with an engineering degree, then they must go through their accreditation process after this professionally. And the national body that does this, when they only have particular schools or particular programs that they will accredit as a professional body. And one of the criteria for accreditation is that the schools must have an academic integrity policy, and they need to be able to show this to the professional accrediting body. And if a school doesn't have this, it can mean that their accreditation is withdrawn, meaning that the credentials that people would have from that school would no longer be valid. So I think, I mean, I didn't talk about this in our policy analysis, and it's outside the scope of our project, but there's absolutely a worthwhile conversation to be had about the role of professional accrediting bodies for what we would consider the professions. So professions for us, would include engineering, nursing, teaching, social work, where that there's, in addition to the universities, beyond that, there's a professional body that people have to belong to in order to practice in their profession after graduation. So I don't know if what this might be like in your country. I'd be interested to learn more about the role of professional bodies, if they exist, how they exist, and what their relationship to the university is.
Indeed, there are accreditation agencies in Turkey, specifically focusing on some disciplines. For example, I'm working in the field of English language teaching, and our department was accredited last year by the accreditation agency, specifically dealing with Faculty of Education. And for example, 4 other programs from my faculty apply to this agency, and they are under investigation right now. And this agency is responsible for accrediting only departments at Faculty of Education, and they are recognized by Council of Higher Education in Turkey. So the system works in this manner. And on the other hand, we have another mechanism, another accreditation agency, and a general accreditation agency working on behalf of Council of Higher Education. And they are providing institutional accreditation to the universities. So we got, for example, departmental accreditation, and my university applied for institutional accreditation from Council of Higher Education. I mean, another body linked to Council of Higher Education. And getting this institutional accreditation is a quite tough process, and we had received some visits within the last month, and I specifically informed the visitors about our intention of promoting academic integrity, for example, about the role of academic integrity. However, to me, it didn't seem that academic integrity policy or issues relating to academic integrity was their priority. But anyway, I know it very well from my colleagues working in Europe too. Any accreditation agency in Europe, they give priority to academic integrity policies. If you do not have well-developed policies, then it means that your practices are questionable.
So it's interesting for me when we have these conversations, I learn so much from you, because when I think about the work we're doing here, and how much more work we need to do to catch up to some of our other country counterparts, right? We would always compare ourselves in Canada, I think, to Commonwealth countries, particularly Australia and the United Kingdom. And for me, you know, I started out doing this work. I thought, oh my gosh, we have a lot of work to do. Where do we even start? And we just started. And, you know, now 4 or 5 years later, we've come so far, and I can see you're leading this work in Turkey, and that there's so many opportunities as well to advance the work, right? And to to do better, and create more opportunities for policy revision, for bringing awareness to this topic, for generating conversations at the local level, the micro level, and then within the departmental level, at the meso level, the institutional level, and then beyond to professional and accreditation bodies. So even though it seems like, well, we don't have this and we don't have this and we have a lot of work to do, also see that this presents a lot of opportunity for research, advocacy, and ultimately leadership.
Yeah, that's true. We need to work closely with accreditation agencies as professionals involved in academic integrity, and for this purpose, we now have a new project supported by Erasmus+. We will be working on this project for the next following 3 years. And the good thing, we will be at Çanakkale 18 Mart University. We will have European Network for Academic Integrity as a partner, Constance University from Germany as another partner, and Maribor University from Slovenia as another partner, and Porto University from Portugal as another partner. More importantly, we have Slovenian accreditation, higher education accreditation agency as a collaborative partner in our project. I mean, they won't be contributing to our outputs on the production of the outputs, but we will be keeping them informed about the outputs and our outputs and getting their feedback. And we consider this very important because accreditation agencies are quite important, and we both need to know about each of us our expectations.
I saw posted on social media that you had been awarded this major research grant. So congratulations to you and to your team and to your partners. This is very exciting, and also demonstrates the ways in which the research funding bodies are paying attention to the need for more scholarship and more research on this area. So it's fantastic, because I think now Turkey will be becoming one of the new world leaders in this way. And I don't say that lightly, but when you have, significant research funding to back your efforts, this positions you as a leader, and that people, I think policymakers will listen to you differently because you have this research award. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Indeed, it is the success of INAI because we managed to submit this proposal by collaborating with partners from INAI, and it becomes an evidence of INAI's success, I believe, because we are trying to promote academic integrity at a global manner, although we seem to be focusing on European level. Indeed, we are trying to contribute it at a global manner, and I believe it will bring some other opportunities for us to progress. Okay, Özgür has some feedback here in the chat box. In Turkey, we have a centralized higher education system. That's why we have legal regulation instead of institutional policies. I wonder what it's like in Canada, Sarah. Do you have a national governance body like Council of Higher Education? Are all Canadian universities autonomous? I believe that it's difficult for higher education institutions to develop institutional policies in a centralized higher education system. Probably you remember it from our co-authored paper with Özgür relating to recruitment practices in Turkey. We have Council of Higher Education here. So Council of Higher Education, as I already mentioned, they provide a framework for the university. So indeed, we have a limited space to develop our policies. All the policies should be matching the expectations of higher education council. On one hand, it seems to be good because they are already establishing some standards to be followed. But on the other hand, this practice could be questionable in terms of being an autonomous organization. So Özgür asking asking the situation in Canada here.
I love this question. I didn't realize Özgür was watching. So hi, Özgür. Nice to have you join us today in this way. I love this question. So in Canada, we do have a sort of a national body called Universities Canada. It's not a government ministry. If I can make a comparison, it's probably more like a United Nations type body where universities would apply to become members. And only the higher quality universities, accredited universities would become members. And then they would follow sort of the recommendations from Universities Canada. There is a degree qualifications framework that's produced by Universities Canada, and basically that the member institutions will come to meetings, agree, discuss this kind of thing. But I think their function would be, it's like, using this United Nations comparison, it's not regulatory, and it's not punitive in any way, that the university presidents would get together as a body to talk about important issues to them. So we do have this sort of national body, governance to some extent, but not necessarily regulatory. They don't have any function to withdraw accreditation from a university, for example, where there are provincial education ministries. And it's different from one province to the next, in that some provinces, they have a combined Ministry of Education that includes both higher education and primary, secondary. In other provinces or territories, that they have two ministries of education, one for primary, secondary education, and another one for higher education and vocational education. We don't have consistency across the country in the ways in which ministries of education are designed. And there have been changes over time. So it can often change with the kind of government that's elected provincially. So sometimes as you get different parties who are elected, the parties want to come in and change things so they have it their way. So I think in Alberta, for example, in the province where I've lived in, we've had both. We've had a Ministry of Education that's been combined, and then they separate them. A different party comes in or a new government comes in, and then they sort of reorganize things in the ways that make sense for them to advance their political agendas. So even though we have these differences in our ministries, the differences are not consistent and they don't stand the test of time. But generally, the accreditation is done at the provincial level through some kind of provincial or territorial ministry of education. So even though the universities are autonomous, they're not free from regulation, because they're still accountable to the ministry. Because they're publicly funded, that public funding would come from the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Advanced Education. So in order to keep receiving funding, of course, we have to adhere to the government legislation. And having looked at the legislative acts, there's very little in academic integrity around those at that level that I've seen. I hope that helps. Gosh, this is a great discussion, right? Looking at the differences between our countries at these big levels. I'm fascinated to know how these questions are arising.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll check the comments from YouTube. I'm sure Özgür should be satisfied, but it seems we have another question here from Güneş.
Yes, Hocam. I think my question is very similar with Özgür Çelik's question. I'm working in a high school, and normally we don't have any regulation about plagiarism. a person, a student submits his or her friend's homework as his or her homework. I would like to learn about the cases. Canada, do you have any regulation about plagiarism? And I am planning to write a policy for my school, but if you don't have any such regulation, how can I write a punishment for these students? If I write, I am sure that my colleagues or our parents will underestimate these, and they will. Okay, it will be very difficult for me. Yes. Do you have any idea? Do you have what kind of regulation do you have in Canada, in high school especially? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And often when I think of these policies for K-12, I actually think of Oscar's work because I know he's done some tremendous work, and his thesis won an award for the work that he did there. With regards to your question about the policies in Canada, I can tell you that I have a colleague here and colleague and friend in Canada, Dr. Brenda Staes, who's been working on exactly this question. And she examined the provincial or territorial documents at the highest government level for, we call it K through 12, so primary and secondary education. And she's about to publish this. So I can let this group know that it will be published soon in this forthcoming book from Springer on academic integrity in Canada. It's just in the final revision stages now. I think by February, end of February, this book should be available. It will be free of cost. It's an open access book. My co-editor received a grant from her university to ensure that the book was completely open access. So by next month, you should be able to read her study on academic integrity policies through K through 12 in Canadian education and her recommendations. And I agree with you that if there are no existing policies, it's very difficult for an individual educator to try and sort of develop something for use at the local level or the classroom level. And we don't do this work. I should say we don't do this work in isolation or in quarantine, but that has different meaning now that we're in COVID times. But we must do this work, I think, in community with one another. And it's worth the time, I think, to spend engaging others in conversation and dialogue about how would we develop this, what would it look like, and to get some support from the school principal for this, because if you don't have the support of your superiors and the educational leaders, it would be, I think, very difficult to do this work on your own.
Sarah, may I interrupt, please? You already referred to Özgür's study, and I believe we have a very good example for now, because Özgür developed the first study for the school that he's experimenting. So the policy toolkit is ready for the use of the others. So the only thing for the others, K-12 teachers or administrators, they just need to log in the tool and they can create the policy for their schools. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that the tool will create the policy for you. It means that you will need to previously run needs analysis in order to understand the needs of your institution, and then you need to identify your role and how you relate responsibilities. So before writing the policy, my suggestion will be having some promotion activities relating to academic integrity. I mean, first of all, familiarize the other teachers and the administrative staff about the importance of academic integrity. Otherwise, if you start without doing this, then probably you won't be able to create the appropriate policy for the institution. What do you think, Sarah?
I agree with you. I agree with you entirely. And with regards to K-12 education, or primary and secondary education, one of the conversations we've been having here is the need to incorporate these conversations and education, not only for children in K to 12, but I actually think that a good starting place is our teacher education programs, what we would call here the Bachelor of Education degrees, right? And so this is why I think the work that Dr. Razi is doing with you is so important, because the training for teachers must include conversations around academic integrity. So those teachers can then take that into their classroom practices and talk to their own students about it. And I think even if you don't have policies, you are empowered to do things in your classroom through teaching and learning, to have conversations with your own students and point out I'm sure you have a very busy curriculum and you're very busy in your classrooms, and to just take moments with your students to point out things around ethical decision making. And I like to frame this in constructive and proactive ways with students about, it's not about avoiding plagiarism. It's instead about giving credit where it's due. And how do we do that? So for example, when I talk with teachers here, I say, if your students are taking, for example, images from the internet and popping them into a PowerPoint presentation that they're giving in class, say to the students, where did you get the image? And can you include the URL for it? It's very simple cut and paste for those students, but it gets them thinking about, where are they getting their information? Who created the knowledge that they're learning, and who created the materials that they're using, whether it's for their student presentations or their projects, and to kind of elevate their thinking and give respect and pay honor to those who came before them, rather than only talking about avoiding punishment or avoiding plagiarism. I think it can be much more generative and exciting for students. And I actually learned about this idea or this approach from some young people that I knew who were fans of like comic books. And these young people, if they become fans of these things with comic books, they know who wrote the comic books, they know who did the illustrations for the comic books, they know the whole story and who developed the story behind them. What they're doing is demonstrating a kind of academic integrity through appreciation, not because anybody told them to avoid something, but because they appreciate this work so much that's been done before them. So I've actually learned a lot from, paying attention to young people who are fans of, in particular, comic books and movies. So if you know somebody who's a fan of movies, they know who directed, who wrote, who produced, who acted. They become like a walking encyclopedia of the history of the movie because they are proud to know about the movie. And I think to myself, how can we create the same level of excitement in our students about appreciating the knowledge that they're learning from? I don't have an answer to that question, but it's one I keep asking, because I think when we can flip it around and not only talk about avoiding punishment, but getting excited about what we know and who we've learned from, the conversation has changed entirely.
So interesting. So it is a requirement for us to collaborate with young generation. Okay, any other contributions from the others? Sarah, if I'm not mistaken, when you were collecting data for the policies, they were openly available on the university web pages, right? Because you work with state universities.
That's correct. Yeah. And as an example, I've shared in the chat just the policies and procedures from my own university. We have two main documents. One is a policy with definitions, for example, and the other is the procedure in basically guiding professors and others what to do if there's a misconduct that's found. So I posted those as examples in case they're useful for you and your students. And these are publicly available, so you're welcome to share these links in any way.
Thank you for the clarification. By the way, I'm just trying to copy what you have provided in the chat box, and meanwhile to transfer them to YouTube in case our audience would need them there. So they will be available for YouTube audience as well.
Thank you for doing that.
Okay, no worries. Okay, any other contribution from our students? Meanwhile, I'm copying here. So you seem to be ready to develop your institutional policies, right?
Yes, hocam, I think this week, may I add something, Salim hocam?
Yes, sure, please.
Yes. This week we had a visitor, an important visit from Ministry of National Education, and I explained our lesson and your center. He is interested in this subject, and he told me that send me email or whatever when you create a policy for your school. But I aware that Tutku hocam and Meltem hocam, I think they will work on this subject, and it is very difficult job. It will be very difficult job for them, because I think it's really difficult to explain this academic integrity. Because this they try to understand with this with general values. Like how can I say? They cannot make is related with academy, I mean. So they have very hard job.
Indeed, I'm not very sure whether I got it correctly, but you welcome someone from Ministry of Education, and you told them about your intention to develop academic integrity policy for your school. This is okay. But my comment on this, when you are developing the policy, you need to take the legislation into consideration. I mean, previously you referred to, for example, sanctions. And when you are matching the sanctions in the policy, for example, for any type of academic misconduct, you need to make sure that you have support from legislation. I mean, first of all, we give priority to legislation. If you do not have any support, I mean, for example, you are referring to an academic misconduct in your policy. However, if it is not recognized by legislation, then it means that it wouldn't be appropriate for you to relate a sanction for this. So if you'd like to develop the policy, please take this into consideration. And more importantly, it doesn't finish by writing the policy. So writing the policy can be considered as the initial step, the first step of instituting a culture of academic integrity. It means that after writing the policy, now you need to have some pedagogical activities. You need to train students, you need to train your colleagues, you need to provide some guidance to the administrators, and you need to integrate also parents here, because you are working at K-12 school. So you need to think about all other people involved in this policy, and you should maintain the activities in accordance with this. So please don't think that you will finish your job when you write the policy. Indeed, it will start by writing the policy.
Slim, we didn't hear you at the end.
Sorry, I'm just suggesting that writing the policy is important, but it doesn't finish by writing the policy. So writing the policy is the initial step, and after writing the policy, indeed we will have more job to do, such as delivering workshops, encouraging people to act with integrity, inviting stakeholders for our activities, and so forth. So if you assume that you will have finished your job by writing the policy, this wouldn't work. Indeed, your job will start after writing the policy.
Hocam, you're muted.
Sorry. Any other contributions? Okay, Sarah, it's almost here. You are here for 2 hours. Very early in the morning. And it seems that our students are all satisfied and they have quite a lot to think after the session. I believe the tips that you provide here will help them a lot for their future research and also for their future accomplishment relating to writing policies. It seems that we don't have any new questions here from our students, but let me check it from YouTube as well. So nothing new in YouTube. Then would you have any final thoughts?
Just to thank you again for the invitation to join you for the second year in a row. It's really an honor to come and talk with you and your students. And you're right, it was early morning, but it wasn't too early. If you were paying close attention when we started, you probably noticed it was a little bit darker in my room because the sun had not yet risen. And through the course of our meeting this morning, now the sun is fully coming into my home office, so you can finally see me in the sunlight. So yeah, the days are starting to get longer here, so that's lovely. But at the time we started, the sun had not yet risen. So I feel like the day has risen and the sun has risen together with all of you today, and it has really been a joy and an honor to spend this time with you.
Oh, it's our pleasure to welcome you here for the second year. We really learned a lot, and this year we learned more about your project, and hopefully in the future we will learn more from your expertise, from your projects. Thank you once again, Sarah. Very much appreciated. Hope to see you soon somewhere in face. Let's hope for the best. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.